Hey everyone, it is time for some battery performance testing results. Today I will be giving you my review of these 6 LiPo batteries. They are all 300 milliamp hour 2-cell batteries, and they all fit in the Beta 75X frame without any modification to the frame. However, they do not all come with XT30 connectors. In most cases, I had to replace the connectors myself. So I'll be talking about these batteries individually, and then I will be comparing them against each other, including a detailed look at their performance. My tests were in the context of the Beta 75X, but I think the results would apply to the Beta 65X, Mobula 7, or any other build with similar electrical requirements. If you want to see how I would mount batteries on those various frames, I already made a video about that. Check out the link in the video description below. Now, I do want to say I'm sorry that it's taken me so long to get this information out to you. I actually started this project months ago, but life got really busy. And as it turns out, trying to get good performance data on batteries is harder than it sounds. I care about good science, and I don't want to misrepresent anybody's product, so I actually put a lot of work into this. But I think I have some interesting results to share with you. And I'm sure you're eager to hear my conclusions on that. So I'm actually going to give that to you first, and then I'm going to go into more detail about my testing method. So, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you some of the results right now. Out of this whole lineup, the most powerful battery for all-out ripping, the battery that has the best performance under extreme high throttle flying, I think, is the 45C Nanotech. You might expect the 70C battery to do better, but it just doesn't, at least not the battery that I have in the tests that I will show you. This is a great battery, however, it's very similar to the 35C version, which is also a great battery. These two batteries are lighter than the 45C version, and so there's reasons you might choose either one. The Beta FPV battery is also very similar to these two, and is also a great choice, and this one comes with the XT30 connector. So if you're flying a Beta 75X or similar build, that might be a deciding factor for you all by itself. Some of you might be wondering about the new GMB battery that was recently announced. I don't actually have any yet, but I have some on order. It came out too late for this round of testing, but it'll be interesting to see how it compares, so you'll have to stay tuned for that. And then that leaves these two batteries by Pulse and Tattoo. These batteries are decent, but their performance is just not quite as good as their competition, and they're also a bit heavier. So that's what I think, but please don't take my word for it. I'm going to do my best to present the data to you and show you how I came to those results, and you can draw your own conclusions. Also, the raw performance under that heavy load kind of situation is not the only factor to consider when looking at batteries, so we're going to go into that. Let's get started. Our first battery is the 300 milliamp hour 2-cell battery by Beta FPV. These batteries were given to me by Beta FPV, so thank you for that. And many of you already have at least one battery like this, because this is the battery that came with the Beta 75X bind and fly. It has since been discontinued. Now they sell a 350 milliamp hour version. It's the same width and just a little bit longer, but I will be showing you the 300 milliamp hour version in today's video because this is a good battery and it's still available from a number of retailers if you want to get one. And since so many people already have one of these, it's an interesting baseline as well. Now, this battery has a 35 to 70 C rating. That means 35 continuous and 70 C for a short burst. I'm going to tell you the C rating of all of the different batteries because that is a necessary part of how we identify which batteries we're talking about. But that is about all that I think the C ratings are good for. They're mostly marketing. In theory, a higher C rating battery should be able to deliver more amps with less resistance. But as we'll see, that is not necessarily true even within the same brand. Okay, one more quick thing about this battery before we continue. I do need to point out this version has 18 gauge wire coming out of it. All the other batteries I'm testing today have 20 gauge wire. I think they originally started making these with 18 gauge wire just like the 75X, but then they switched to 20 gauge wire on both the batteries and on the 75X. Whether or not 18 versus 20 gauge wire matters or when it matters, could be the topic for another day. Right now I'm just letting you know these are the ones that I have and these are the ones that I'm testing. And our next battery is very similar. This is the 35 to 70C battery by Turnigy Nanotech. These are similar weight and they're similar in many respects, which makes sense. I'm told these cells were actually sourced from the same place as the Nanotechs, and so you can expect these two batteries to be pretty similar. These batteries I've been using for a while. Ever since I started with 2S, I had some of these, and I've also had some of these. These is a 45 to 90C version, and then there's the newer one. This is the 70 to 140C version. This just came out recently, actually while I was working on this video, and so here it is. I only bought one of these because I wanted to just see what it was like in comparison to these. All of these were paid for with my own money. And then our last two batteries are also similar to each other. This is the 45C Pulse battery. This was given to me by Pulse, so thank you for that. And this is the 45C Tattoo battery, and this was also given to me, so thank you for that. These two batteries are a slightly different shape. They're a little bit more rounded, but they still fit in the frame without any modification to the frame, so that's cool. Now, I do have to mention one more thing about the Tattoo battery. I mentioned this in my last video, but I'll say it again. There is a larger version of it floating out there. This, I'm told, represents the current product, so if you buy one today, hopefully you'll get this. This was an earlier run. It is larger, it's heavier, it does not fit in the frame, and it has really terrible performance. So I will be looking at the performance of this one in today's video. I might say a few things about this one, but it doesn't really count because it's not the current product. So I put all the weights and measurements into a spreadsheet, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below, so you can pour over that data to your heart's content. Now, in terms of performance, I flew all of these batteries multiple times on the Beta 75X, and I also did some more controlled tests so we could compare them against each other. But before we go into that, I have a few disclaimers to get out of the way. Okay, disclaimer number one. Many of these batteries were given to me for the purpose of testing and review, so it is possible that they may have been handpicked before shipment. I don't have any reason to believe that that actually happened, but I acknowledge the possibility. I think I should be able to give you a pretty objective opinion because I do not work for any of these companies. I do not get paid for referrals. I do not make money on the success or failure of any of these products. I simply wanted to know for myself how the performance would compare, and now I want to share those results with you. I think this is an important topic because I think getting good, reliable power to your build makes a big difference. Okay, disclaimer number two, I did fly all of these batteries multiple times before doing any of the really formalized performance tests. I wanted to get a feeling for myself of how they would fly in the air, but it is possible that my handling of the batteries could affect their performance in some way. But I can tell you they were all brand new at the beginning of this process, and none of them have ever been overcharged, over-discharged, overheated, or left charged for more than 24 hours. And the most important thing is that all of these batteries, whatever happened to them, happened to all of them to the best of my ability. And finally, disclaimer number three, my testing method is not perfect. I am just using the tools that I have available to me, and really good science would require us to do these tests over and over again with a really large sample set. And a large sample set is another thing that I don't have. So it's possible that you may receive batteries that are better or worse than the ones that I'm testing here and showing you. I acknowledge that. You should really look at all the different bullet points of information and come to your own conclusions. And speaking of conclusions, I'll give you my conclusions now. Okay, big picture. All 6 of these batteries work well enough for you to get out and have a great time flying your 2S Whoop. If you've only ever flown a 1S build with batteries like this, or even the 2x1S setup, then probably any of these batteries are going to feel awesome to you. So I don't want you to think that any of these batteries are bad necessarily, but they are not all the same. Some of these batteries are definitely better than others, but to talk about those differences, we need to consider a couple of different factors. So I will be rating these batteries according to the convenience of using them, the quality control as far as I have seen, the weight, the capacity, the internal resistance, and the performance in the air. By convenience, I mean, what does it look like to use one of these batteries on your build, and how much work do you have to do to make that work? That's going to depend on what kind of build you're using, but if your build is a Beta 75X, then the convenience award has got to go to the Beta FPV battery, unsurprisingly. The reason I say that, all of these batteries fit in the frame, But this one also comes with the XT30 connector, and so it's all ready to go. If you want to buy a battery that will just work in your Beta 75X, this is a great choice. And like I said, you can still get these from a number of vendors. I also like the fact that this has a nice short balance plug and a relatively short power lead. In fact, this is the shortest power lead of any of them. And this balance plug, I never want this to be very long. The longest I want this to be is long enough to stick into the balance board so that the battery can flop to the side. Anything longer than that and you're just adding weight and it's going to get in the way. This one is relatively short and I like that. These other 5 batteries all came with the red JST connector that looks like this. If you have a red JST connector on your build, then of course these batteries would be more convenient to use, and especially these would be quite convenient. I like the length of these. It's about 4 centimeters, and this has that short balance wire, just like the Beta FPV battery that I showed you. So these would be convenient if you were using them with a red JST build, but if you did that, you would not get performance like you're going to see in this video. And you know, some people fly that way and it doesn't bother them. But since you're watching a video about LiPo battery performance, I suspect you're the kind of person who might care about that difference. Switching these to XT30 is not that hard. So these 3 would come in second place for convenience. And the least convenient batteries to use are these 2 batteries by Pulse and Tattoo. And the reason I say that is not only do they normally come with the red JST, but they come with really long wires. You can take one of these and put it in the frame. You'll see what I mean. This is just way more wire than you need or want. However, since I would cut it short and put the XT30 on, you can of course pick any length of wire when you do that. But these balance plugs are also super long, and so it's going to hang down, might catch on things. You could try to strap it somewhere maybe, but it'd be kind of in the way. And you're adding weight for all this extra wire, so I don't really like that. And trimming these, you either have to have the crimping tool and the supplies to do that, or you have to do what I did and cut and splice the wires. That is pretty time consuming. It takes longer than the XT30 connectors, and that's pretty inconvenient. The next factor I want to talk about is quality control. Now, I don't have enough of these different batteries from these brands to really compare them for quality control. I can just tell you about the experience that I have had. I have not had any problem with these Beta FPV batteries, the Pulse or Tattoo. They have been fine, and this one has been fine, although I only have one of these 70C Turnigy batteries. These ones I have more experience with. These are the ones that I started when I did my original 2S Whoop, and even before that. So I've used these over a longer period of time, and I've had more copies of these batteries. And I can tell you that in my experience, at least, the Turnigy brand has really poor quality control. When I first ordered these, I got 2 of the 35s and 6 of the 45s. One of them was immediately bad. It was wired incorrectly on the inside. They did replace that one after I made some videos and filled out their whole thing. Later on, not much later on, I found out that one of the 35s and one of the 45s actually had a dead or a really weak cell that would not hold its voltage very well. And unfortunately, I had just missed the 30-day return period on those, and so I was out of luck with those. So of my 8 original Turnigy batteries, 3 of them were bad. And unfortunately, I've heard similar reports from other people. When these batteries are good, they're awesome, but the quality control is not always there. Next, let's talk about weight. The lightest battery in this lineup for me is the 35 to 70C Nanotech battery. It is lighter than the Beta FPV battery, but again, mine has the 18 gauge wire and may have larger tabs on the inside, and I think that is why there's a difference. If you get the 20 gauge version of this, I think it weighs 17 grams. It would be very similar in weight to these. And then also similar, just a little bit heavier, is the 70C Nanotech battery. And it's lighter than the 45, so that's interesting. But let's look at them on a graph. So here you can see the weight of all of the different batteries, and this is the weight as shipped with the length of wire and the connectors that come on these batteries the way you would get them. Each bar shows the weight, and the band at the top shows you the variation in weight that I observed. I measured all of the different batteries and recorded the lightest and heaviest that I found for each one, and so you can see the variations there. And then this graph shows the weights as I actually flew them. That means for the Nanotech batteries, cutting off the red JST and replacing the XT30, and here you can see that 35C Nanotech battery. It is the winner for lowest weight. Next, let's talk about capacity. These batteries all have a 300 milliamp hour rating, and so they should have the same capacity, but in my test there are actually some differences. The first thing that I did was I flew them around my backyard one at a time, just to see how long I could fly if I flew them really gentle. I'm not going to nitpick the difference between those flights because I think there's too much fluctuation just based on how I fly. But I was looking for any outliers in the data. I did not find any outliers that way. All of these batteries were able to fly for at least 4 minutes. The one that flew the longest was the 35 to 70C Nanotech battery at 4 minutes and 45 seconds. I also tested these on the bench using my charger. I charged them all to 4.2 volts and then let them sit long enough to make sure they were acclimated to room temperature, each one at a time. And then I put them on my ISDT T8 charger to discharge. I chose a 2C discharge rate for this test, and so that's 0.6 amps of continuous discharge. And I set the cutoff at 3.3 volts per cell. You got to set the cutoff somewhere. That's the value that I chose. I find that 3.3 volts per cell is a very thoroughly drained battery. Anything after that and the voltage really drops off quickly. I didn't want to risk damaging the battery, so that's the cutoff that I used. Now, as you're discharging, you are going to have a lower voltage than the resting voltage, and that means that I stopped discharging when the voltage under load reached 3.3 volts on either cell. And so we're not going to be able to discharge the entire capacity that way, but we should be able to get relatively close. The important thing is, when I did this test repeatedly for the same battery, I was able to get the same results within 1 or 2 milliamp hours. It was really repeatable. And so I think that makes it a fair comparison, not to look at the absolute value of the numbers, but to look at them compared to each other. And here you can see the results of that test in this graph. The 3 batteries on the left, the Beta FPV, the 35C Nano, and the 45C Nanotech, those are all so similar in capacity that I'm going to say that they are identical. But you can see that the 70C Nanotech battery actually has less capacity than the others. It's not a huge difference, but it is a difference that I was able to repeat in my measurements. Remember I said that this battery was lighter than the 45, and I thought that was interesting? Normally, when you increase the C rating of a battery, you also increase the weight because that C rating is not based just on the chemistry of the cells, but it's also based on the size of the tabs, connecting those cells, connecting the wires themselves, the whole package. And so normally that increases the weight. Here they went from 45C to 70C and reduced the weight, and that's because they also reduced the capacity. It's only about 5%, but I think that's interesting. And you can see the Tattoo battery discharged a similar amount, also less than those first 3 batteries. And for whatever reason, the Pulse battery did the worst in this particular test. Now, another thing we can test for on the ground is the internal resistance of the batteries. That's going to be the resistance including the wires, through the tabs, through the cells, out the other side, the whole package. And a higher resistance battery is going to generate more heat as the current flows through there, and so that is going to hurt your performance. In theory, a higher C rating battery should have a lower internal resistance, but we can test for that. Now, there are different ways to test internal resistance, and how you test definitely matters. Unfortunately, I don't have the most accurate type of internal resistance meter. I just have my charger, and it can measure internal resistance as it charges. Again, that's not the most accurate value, so I don't want you to look at the values that I have as being absolute values in and of themselves, but I was able to repeat the test multiple times for the batteries and get pretty reproducible results. Not exactly reproducible, but within about plus or minus 3 milliohms, and that is accurate enough to actually see some meaningful differences between these batteries. The way that I did these was I started at storage voltage and discharged to 3.3 volts per cell. I made sure that they were all at the same room temperature, the same room in my basement, and then did a 1C charge all the way up to 4.2 volts.
That is a nice slow charge. That means that they were pretty cold, and that is going to affect the internal resistance values as well. In the air, they would warm up under load, and that would actually improve the performance and lower the internal resistance of the batteries. So again, these values depend very much on the testing method, but by testing them against each other, there are results that I can see, and I think these results actually do carry over to the performance in the air. And here are the results in a graph. Again, the height of the bar shows you the internal resistance, and this is internal resistance per cell. And then the band on top shows you the variation from one cell to the next. A thin band on top would indicate that the cells are very similar to each other, very consistent in the resistance, whatever that may be. But obviously the lower total bar is what we're looking for. And the winner is obvious. It is the 45 to 90C nanotech battery. It has clearly the lowest internal resistance, even lower than the 70C battery. You would think 70C should have a lower internal resistance, but that is not the results that I got. You can also see that in my test, the Beta FPV, 35C nanotech, and 70C nanotech all had pretty similar internal resistance, and the Pulse had the highest, and the Tattoo was very close to that. One thing that is interesting is look how thin the band is on the 70C nanotech. That's because when I measured it, the two cells were actually within 1 milliohm of each other, so it was the best matched. And that's cool to see because matching the resistance of the cells is actually one of the advertised bullet points on this battery, and in my results, that is true. However, if you're going to test the internal resistance of the cells and match them together, it sure would be nice if that matched value was lower. So the last aspect to consider is the performance in the air, and that is, of course, the most important aspect. I saved it for last because it's actually the hardest to demonstrate visually and show you the difference. And so if you want to see that, stick around for the rest of the video. I'll show you how I tested them. But here are my results. Again, big picture, all of these batteries work. And in fact, when I first take off with any of these batteries, if I didn't know which one it was, and if I didn't immediately do a huge punch out or something, I probably couldn't tell the difference in the very beginning of the flight. They all have a lot of power at the beginning of the flight. Later on in the flight is where you start to feel the difference. These two batteries definitely feel weaker to me later in the flight. The way that I feel this is if you are already flying really fast, maybe 50 to 70% throttle, fast forward, and then you want to pop up over something, and you need the thrust to do that, and you take the throttle and slam it to 100%, what happens to your speed? With these late in the flight, I feel like there's a pretty sluggish response on the throttle when I do that. And that is not a good position to be in, because not only will you have a harder time predicting the throttle response, but the flight controller will as well. That will result in more prop wash and maybe even more washouts. These batteries do a little bit better in that respect. I feel like these three in particular have good power all the way through the flight. I have no complaints about this. They perform well and the way that I would expect, and the performance of these three batteries is similar enough that I don't know if I could tell you the difference all the way to the end of the flight. This is the 35C nanotech and the 70C nanotech. They're also very similar in weight, all three of these batteries, so I feel like they're actually pretty interchangeable. The one that stands out is the 45C nanotech. This one, I am always wowed by how much power I have at the end of the flight. The throttle response is very consistent and very powerful, very punchy on changing the throttle, even very late in the flight. Sometimes I have to be careful not to over discharge these batteries because I feel like I have so much power even when they're reaching very close to the end of the capacity. I use the virtual current sensor to help keep track of that, as well as the voltage. So the performance winner, both in my experience flying and in the test that I'm about to show you, is the 45C nanotech. Now, I know a handful of people who have gotten this 70C battery recently and absolutely love it. They switched to this battery from whatever they had before and were just wowed by the performance of this battery. And so that is awesome. I think maybe they got better ones and I got a worse one. That could be part of it. But I think part of it is just it's really nice to get new batteries. If you fly like me, I'm not very gentle on my batteries, normally speaking, and they do wear down. I have a bunch of these, and they do not perform nearly as well as the most recent batch that I got, and that's just because they have been worn down over the abuse over time. So no matter what batteries you're flying, if you get some fresh batteries, I think you'll like the performance. I've certainly had that experience when I got some fresh 35C Nanos or the fresh Beta FPV batteries when those came in. Getting new batteries, that new battery feel is always good. And I think that might be part of what people are experiencing with this. Oh, and here's another bullet point of information that I think is interesting. On 2 occasions, I charged all of these batteries thinking that I would be able to fly them that day. And then I wasn't able to fly them. I had to fly them the next day or discharge them the next day. And on those occasions, I took note of the fact that the voltage on all of these cells was still holding strong at 4.2 volts or 4.19 volts per cell, and that's pretty normal. However, the voltage on these had dropped after just 24 hours. The cells on these were either 4.13 or 4.14 volts per cell, and one of them on the pulse dropped as low as 4.10 volts. So that's only 1/10 of a volt, but after 24 hours, the fact that these are losing their voltage and these are not, I think that's significant. I think that means that the chemistry in these batteries is holding up better than these.
All right, now it's time to go into more detail about the actual performance of these batteries. I'm going to show you the tests that I did and how those results panned out. If you're still watching this, I think you'll find it interesting. I certainly learned a few things in this process. And if you've ever tried to get this kind of data for yourself, you know that it's a lot harder than it sounds, at least if you want to be fair and objective, which was my goal. Originally, I wanted to do all of my tests on the Beta 75X out in the air, the way that I actually fly it, because I really value that kind of data. It didn't quite work out for a couple of reasons. One, the availability of my time, and also rain, so practical factors like that. And two, because I tried to do some tests like that, and I just couldn't control all of the variables well enough to get results that I thought were fair to compare against each other. So I did use the Beta 75X for my tests, but one set of tests is outside and one set of tests is on the bench. And just so you know, the props that I had were new. They're stock props. They're not new anymore. The rest of this build is not in perfect condition either. I just say that because I don't want you to compare the performance of my build to any other build or anything like that. That's not the point. We're comparing the batteries against each other because whatever one battery had to do, they all had to do.
So my outdoor test was a vertical punch-out test, starting with a fully charged battery at 4.2 volts per cell. This one happens to be the Beta FPV battery, and this is the Beta 75X. I'm sitting on a little box in my backyard. I'm going to arm it, and then I'm going to watch the arm timer for 5 seconds. That's just to make sure all of the motors are spinning and everything is ready to go. On the 5-second mark, I will blast off at 100% throttle, and you can see the throttle here. And I'm just going to climb these trees as fast as I can. I call it done when this tree drops below the horizon. You can also see the voltage here on my OSD. This is the voltage per cell, not the total voltage. And these are the numbers that I've been writing down. And here we go. I'll show you all 6 at the same time and freeze them as they hit the top. So yeah, if this was a race, then it was a super close finish. I could count frames in the DVR and tell you exactly which one came in first and second, but I feel like we're splitting hairs at that point. It might be within the error of measurement. I think the voltage is going to give us more information because we can plot what happened to the voltage over time. The x-axis is sampled at half-second intervals. That's 15 frames in the DVR. And the y-axis is the voltage. As you can see, the 45C Nanotech battery ended with the highest voltage. The 35C Nanotech and the Beta FPV battery were tied, followed by the 70C Nanotech battery a little below that. And then the Pulse and Tattoo batteries, their lines are just a little bit longer because the time that it took them to reach the top rounded up to the next half-second window. All right, let me show you my setup for testing batteries indoors. I took the Beta 75X without a battery and I strapped it to this tripod so that it can't take off, and the battery would just hang down here, and that would let me change the battery quickly between tests without moving the drone too much. During the tests, I would arm it and control it with my transmitter, just as if I was flying, except it can't go anywhere. Compared to flying outside, this setup gave me a lot more control over the test environment. I was able to run the motors at specific speeds for specific amounts of time, and then repeat those same conditions across multiple batteries. And unlike the punch-out test, which I had to keep relatively short, these we can do over the full duration of the battery. The downside to bench testing like this is it's really impossible to exactly simulate the electrical requirements that you would have flying around in the air when you're strapped in like this. In particular, the air above is stationary before it gets sucked down in, and that can require a lot of amps of the motor. My tests err on the side of pushing the batteries harder than I think I would in the air, and that's going to exaggerate the difference between the batteries, so take that into account. Originally, I was going to do a test where I would just run the motors at 100% throttle just to see what would happen. I figured each battery would be able to run for several seconds, and then I would stop the test when it dropped to 3.3 volts per cell. I actually did that test, and the unlucky candidate to be first in line was this Beta FPV battery. I say unlucky because, to my surprise, this battery depleted its entire capacity without ever dropping to 3.3 volts. My jaw was on the floor. I couldn't believe it. The test was still going on. I'm like, should I stop it? Should I let it go? I let it run to completion, entire battery in one pulse of 100% throttle. For the record, that's about 16 amps of continuous draw until this battery was gone. Super impressed, but the battery was very hot and a little bit puffy afterwards. So I did not continue testing this battery. I actually switched it out for one of my other Beta FPV batteries to do the rest of the test, just in case I had permanently damaged the battery. So I wanted a test that would hit that high load case, but not completely destroy the battery. In the end, I decided to run the test like this. I would arm it and immediately go to 40% throttle, and then wait for 5 seconds using the on-screen arm timer. The instant it hit 5 seconds, I'd go to 100% throttle and let it do that for 5 seconds, and then let it cool off at 40% throttle for 5 seconds. 100% for 5 seconds, 40% for 5 seconds. So the 100% is going to give a really powerful draw on the battery, and we'll be able to see how they withstand that, and then the 40% lets it cool off. To make sure I was hitting the correct throttle values, I set up this custom curve for my left stick. So I've got this wide band in here that's 40% throttle, and then anything up in the top here is going to be 100% throttle. And you can see that in this value right here. I can wiggle the stick, but anywhere here it says minus 19.4. That's about 40% throttle, and anywhere in here is going to count as that. Anywhere near the top is going to be exactly 100% throttle. 40% throttle, 100% throttle. So you can see how I could hit those values repeatedly. Here you can see the results from all 6 batteries overlaid into a single graph. It's a little hard to see, so I'll zoom in on the voltage range where we spend most of the flight. To start with, let me pick out one of them so it's easier to see what's going on here. This is the Beta FPV battery. You can see that the voltage really plummeted, hitting this low point 10 seconds into the flight. That is at the end of the first 5 seconds of 100% throttle. After 5 seconds of rest, the voltage goes way back up, and then we repeat the pattern. One thing that's interesting to note is that you can definitely see the performance improving as the batteries warm up. And then after a while, of course, the voltage starts to go back down again because we're depleting the capacity. I stopped the test when the battery hit 3.3 volts. That was my cutoff for this test. As you can see, the Nanotech battery was very similar, but it actually did outperform the Beta FPV battery in this particular case. It's interesting because the low points at the end of the burst, that was about the same for the 2 batteries, but for whatever reason, the Nanotech battery recovered more quickly and got the voltage back up during those periods of rest. Next, let's compare the 35C Nanotech to the 70C version. Check this out. These batteries are totally the same. These graphs overlap exactly for almost the entire flight. That means they're hitting the same voltages at the same point to the accuracy of the OSD, which is 0.05 volts. Pretty incredible. The only real difference is at the end, the 35C Nanotech did survive for one additional pulse before hitting that 3.3 volt threshold. Maybe that's a fluke. Maybe it's because it has more capacity. Next, here's that 70C battery compared to the 45C version. There's not a huge difference. These graphs do overlap at many points, but you can see the 45C battery did have a higher voltage at many points, and notably, it held on significantly longer, ending the test at 2 minutes and 40 seconds. In this set of tests, the 45C Nanotech is our clear winner. Okay, next comparison here is that 45C Nanotech compared to the 45C Pulse battery. I feel kind of bad about this one. I kind of wish I had continued the test. It hit that 3.3 volt threshold earlier than the others, but I suspect that it barely hit it and would have continued. But that was the rules of the test, and so you can see the results here. And then here is the Tattoo battery. It did better in this test. Actually, this is a quite respectable result. I would have a great time flying this battery. It's just not quite as good as the Nanotech. When I introduced these batteries, I warned you that there is a fatter version of the Tattoo battery out there from an earlier run. Might still be in some warehouses, so you have to watch out for that. I said that battery had terrible performance, and terrible is a strong word, and I just want you to know I don't use that word lightly. Check out how that battery did in this test. It could not even survive a single pulse. The battery voltage just plummeted. You really don't want this battery. After these tests, I figured I was done. I used these batteries for some personal flying and for some racing. I was a little less careful with them after that. But then I decided I should probably redo my bench test just to make sure that the results were repeatable, that it wasn't a fluke, or if there was variation, to let us see how much variation there is in the test data. The results are not exactly the same, but the relative stack ranking is similar. Here, the Pulse and Tattoo batteries did very similarly to each other, although the Pulse battery actually lasted a little longer this time. The Beta FPV battery and the 70C Nanotech did better than either of those, and they were very similar to each other. They finished at 2 minutes and 20 seconds, and for whatever reason, in this test, the 35C Nanotech actually broke ahead of the pack in a significant way, especially late in the flight, ending at 2 minutes and 50 seconds. And here is the 45C Nanotech. It is once again on the top of our charts, but this time it was really pretty shocking. Look at this result. Once the battery warms up, it's taking 100% throttle for 5-second punches over and over and over again, and the voltage is only changing by like 1/10 of a volt per cell. The voltage does not drop below 3.5 volts per cell once, until it reaches 2 minutes and 30 seconds into this test. And even then it holds strong. It holds above 3.4 volts all the way until the end, and it drops off in the last 5 seconds, ending close to 3 minutes. I couldn't believe how long this lasted. But not just that, I could have told you the winner of this test without even looking at the numbers. It simply sounded different. A while back, Joshua Bardwell was testing 4-cell batteries, and he found a MaxAmps battery that performed so well in his tests, it just kind of defied all expectations. He referred to that battery as a unicorn, just kind of a crazy thing that he found through testing. Well, this 45C Nanotech is my unicorn. It's really a shame that the Turnigy brand seems to have inconsistent quality control, because when these batteries are good, they are really good. If they could somehow test these batteries and put the ones that are this good into a different bin, I think that would be worth paying a little extra. Well, that's it. I hope you've picked up some useful information, and I hope it helps you get out there and enjoy the awesome hobby of micro FPV. I have so much fun with these builds, and it's crazy to see how quickly everything is changing. Even in the batteries, we're starting to see more batteries coming out on the market, and as the popularity of 2S Whoops grows, I think we'll see a lot more of that. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In particular, I've got more batteries that I've been meaning to test. I don't know when I'm going to get around to that. I'm not going to be able to spend as much time as I did on this video, but let me know what kind of information you want the most out of those batteries, and I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, see you around. Happy flying.